COVID's been the chief digital officer for most businesses, right? It's forced businesses to think digital transformation.
Yes, yeah.
And, COVID, who wants to hold a passport that might be infected sort of thing? So it had to go touchless. So we had this, concept of setting a business objective of not having to break your stride walking through the airport. We're not there yet, but we're getting very close.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain. Today we're joined by Glenn Morgan. Welcome along, Glenn. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Paul. It's really great to be here.
Yeah, well, look, it's a privilege to have you in the studio. We've, I guess, connected over the last, couple of years during this COVID time, but you've been UK, London-based, so we haven't had a chance to have you in the studio, but you're here in New Zealand, so great opportunity to sort of sit
enjoying
down
the weather.
Pouring with rain outside. It's just feel like another London day, but a bit warmer though, right?
Yeah,
Surely.
It was -5 when I left, so you could. It's much better. So even though it's raining, it's fine. It's fine.
Yep. Now, I was trying to work out how to introduce you, but what I usually do with the New Zealand Tech Podcast is actually just to hand it over to the guest to explain where they fit into this big, wide world of tech. So, how would you like to do that?
So, pretty simple background. I'm a Kiwi, but I've been travelling. Did the usual Kiwi experience of going travelling, except for I forgot to come back. And I've been out of the country for about 30 years. And, I've travelled all around the world, worked around the world. My previous role that I've just finished up with was the CTO at International Airlines Group, which is, most people would know it as British Airways, but it's British Airways, Aer Lingus, Iberia, a number of carriers that are there. And I'm also what they call the director of Hangar 51, which was the corporate CVC or corporate venture capital group. And what we would do there is do investments into the startup side of things. So one half was the sort of business side, working with the businesses and working with all the airlines and the loyalty. And the other half was looking at new tech and modern and investing in that technology. So all sorts of different things. I've been with IAG or British Airways for the last 25 years. I've just literally, I'll finish in a couple of days' time and back here home to see the family and have Christmas and enjoy the weather, hopefully.
Yeah, look, it's a cool time of year for folks to come home, and I do enjoy it when we get an opportunity to
allowed to come home.
Sit down. Yeah, well, that's been part of it, hasn't it, over the last few years? So it's nice that we have a level of normality that's might be a new normal, but it's sort of closer to the summers and Christmases of years gone by now, which is great. And as well as that stuff, also you were involved in IATA, which some of our listeners who are involved in the travel industry may be aware of. International Air Travel Association, there as chair of the Digital Transformation Advisory Council. So there's quite a lot of things behind the scenes, behind those roles that you've done,
yes,
as well. And I guess that's good to sort of paint a little bit of a picture of the view you have and the sorts of projects and so on you've been involved in over over a period.
As the chair of that council, and so IATA is essentially 291 global airlines. So it's pretty much 90% of the travel market space in terms of airlines belong to IATA, and that's the sort of travel. You probably see it in your little travel shop, little sign down in the bottom there, and
that's
not many people know what's behind it. And essentially what it does is it sets the standards and the strategies for the industry to collaborate and work together on. And of course, digital transformation is fundamental to all businesses now. And of course, so we reported directly to essentially the Board of Governors. So that was sort of, and under Willie Walsh, who's the current Director General, and we would sort of lead with what the strategy for the airlines needed to be, how to deal with things that were happening in the industry, everything from cyber, data, through to transformation of passenger experiences, cargo, you name it.
Great. Well, I'm keen today for us to sort of probably delve into a mix of areas. One aspect is what's the role for New Zealand? What should we be playing when it comes to sort of aerospace and innovation, growing our economy. Then the other side, which is probably the bigger discussion, although we could probably go either way. We'll see how we go. Is that journey of digital transformation of technology and innovation sort of transforming the world of travel. And so there's sort of, I guess, some past, present, stories, and then looking towards the future as well. So I think there's plenty we can delve into there, Glenn. So maybe we start on that side, because within the roles that you've had, Chief Technology Officer and the other things that you've done over these sort of I was going to say quarter of a century, but
thanks, Paul.
I was like, anyway, it's been said now, so there you go. Yeah. There must be a really wide variety of things that you've been involved in and seen. So maybe we can look back at what have been some of those things where technology has been an enabler for transforming the industry. There's so many things we take for granted now, but actually we're probably a real big challenge to get into place. Right?
Yeah, I break it into the three chunks and sort of that past, present, and future aspects. I mean, the travel sector is one of the most interesting sectors to work in from a technology point of view. In fact, as CTO, we were having a conversation just before, and we were talking about talent. What's one of the challenges for most businesses now, and that's tech talent. And the great thing about working in the aviation sector is it's actually a talent attraction, because we have a very complex business model. If you think about it, if you look at something like British Airways, it's the second largest engineering business in the United Kingdom. Right, so it's big in its own right, just in the engineering sector, let alone the logistics, the selling side of things, the distribution side of things, through to the cargo, loyalty, all of those areas. So it's really an attraction. What's happened in typically airlines were leading in transformation, and if I go back many years ago, you think about it, supersonic travel, it was a thing, Concorde, those sorts of things, right through. And if most people, will realize now, and it's a thing, you can buy anything off the internet and go into the internet. I can, unfortunately, I'm going to show my age here again. I can remember, sitting at the CIO for British Airways, talking to the board saying, we need to embrace this internet, because we need to, people are going to start buying tickets online. And I remember directly, that one of the senior directors going, no one's going to buy an airline ticket off the computer, right? And so, but we wouldn't even think a second thought about it nowadays. It's sort of like the microwave. It's like the ATM. You don't take a second thought. Where I was going with that was, the transformation, airlines and aviation tend to be quite leading edge on transformation. And it's because they have a complex business model. They've needed to keep that continuous growth. And going back before the internet, airlines had e-commerce before the internet. You could walk into a travel shop, buy a round-the-world ticket, by several airlines. It was all in the back end. It was all
it was all through the computers, wasn't it? Yeah.
But you ended up with those little paper tickets, right?
Yeah,
and you remember those paper tickets that used to pull it out? The airlines then digitized those into e-tickets. And that was a massive transformation. And now, it's on your smartphone, or not even, we're at the next generation where you don't even need a boarding pass. And we'll probably come on to that in that future section. But so, that's the transformation. You've gone from sort of, having those e-commerce, and then, of course, the internet come along, and that changed the whole world. And airlines and aviation had to adapt to that new world. So, there's always been some interesting things, and the business keeps evolving. There's huge areas, autonomy, automation. There's machine vision, using the cameras. There's cameras in everything nowadays. you can't look without seeing a screen or a camera. And, so how do we utilize those? AI, you may have heard a lot more about artificial intelligence and what's happening in AI. You put those things together and you can see, massive transformations coming along. But it started with those sorts of transformations, moving from a paper process to a digital process. And, we just have continued on down that journey.
Because the airline and travel industries have been early adopters of technology, what sort of challenges has that brought? Because we often end up in organisations with, this old, archaic sort of legacy, technologies that, we really wish would go away, right? So there's that element of, when technology is brought in earlier, if it's not able to be replaced, then it can kind of get stuck in place.
Yes.
I mean, what's that look like for you within that sort of British Airways and the IAG group with dealing with some of that?
So British Airways is over 100 years old, right?
Yeah,
and some of the tech felt like it was from 100 years ago too. So, but I mean, it has the latest, cloud-based serverless infrastructure through to some, fairly old technology. I think I would rephrase the question, which is saying, what is the business? We shouldn't be thinking about technology, right? Technology should become invisible. We should be thinking about the sort of proposition or the business outcomes that we're looking for, the processes and the people aspects, and then the technology should be able to fit and be an enabler for that. So I think that, over the years, technical debt does build up. That becomes like a housekeeping exercise. You need to ensure that you're refreshing and driving forward that technology to keep it current. And there's things like, cyber that you need to worry about that does it. The tech actually just, goes out of support and out of service along those sides. And I think that the process is to just get, quite structured about it, have plans in place, speak early to the business about things that are coming along. So, don't dump something on them and say, in the next 6 months, you're going to need to replace this system. Never would happen. You talk to the business and say, in 2 years' time, we will need to invest X million into replacing these platforms and engage it. So I'd rather talk about business outcomes versus it's tech and technical debt and stuff like that. It switches people off. Tech guys are nerds. They talk about lots of acronyms. And,
do we?
Yeah, we do. We do. We need to translate that between what's the business outcome you're driving, and then having just doing a tech's job should be things should be current, things should be in support, things should be secure, should be trusted, and everything like that, and let people be able to mature and do that, but explain business outcomes to the business, and that helps drive that, drive out that technical debt. So you should be constantly looking forward, looking at those roadmaps and saying, I'm not going to replace this tomorrow, because that's a difficult conversation, right? If I walked in here and said, you need to replace all your video equipment and all of this audio equipment because it's all out of date and, trust me, I'm from the tech department, you're going to be walked out the door, right? Whereas if we have a conversation saying, look, in 2 years' time, this equipment's going to be at an X age. You need to start thinking about how we replace it. There's some good reasons behind it. We'll be able to actually drive some better outcomes with the newer technology, and that's how you address it. But yeah, technical debt's one big challenge. Cyber is clearly a linked challenge, because old equipment tends to be the stuff that's got the problems from a cyber perspective. But yeah, you have a range. And then within aviation, you have a big challenge, which is you've got a very big supply chain. Everything from the Airbuses and Boeings and, the DHLs for logistics and all of those sorts of things. So you have quite a long tail within your tech footprint that you're connected to. So, the IATA. There's billions of money transiting around the IATA network, which is the settlement system that's called the BSP. It's the billing settlement system.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And that's where, if you're buying a ticket from New Zealand and you're happy to fly British Airways or an American or another carrier, then Air New Zealand or its partners would pay, Singapore or British Airways or American or whoever, they would pay it through this clearinghouse. So that's infrastructure that's an extension to what you've already got. So
Right.
there's your core technologies and then your sort of supply chain technologies you need to worry about. And technical debt goes through all of that. So and cyber goes through all of that clearly.
Yeah, yeah. Now, looking at it from a budgetary perspective, I'm picking that you were dealing with a pretty big number in terms of overall budget, but and maybe you could let us in a little bit on that. But I'm always sort of curious as to the buckets that things get put into, right? We often sort of, IT, technology, that's a cost center over in a particular area, right? Whereas, I see technology as this business enabler. It should be thought of differently, and we see that in some areas where certain digital things are, that sits under a marketing budget because that grows the business, or and so on. How are you seeing that evolve, and what are the sort of numbers?
I don't think
we're
this is just
talking
an
about?
aviation thing.
It's across the board.
Yeah,
isn't
it's
it?
across the board, and there's two types of businesses, right? There's businesses that think they're not a tech business, and then there's businesses that think they're a tech business, doing services and selling products and services. Every business is a tech business, right? You can't function. Most businesses today can't function without technology, right? So I'm much in your latter answer that you were saying, which is it should be about business outcomes. You should be trying to drive business outcomes. Technology is just an enabler, right? And the role of the CTO was to be very clear with other divisions around the group and around the business to ensure that technology wasn't seen as a cost. It was actually seen as an enabler. And driving it in there. And now it's a constant battle, and most CIOs or CTOs will have that battle, right?
Yeah,
Which is, it's just a cost. The CFO comes along, it's just a cost. Or what's this number? How do we drive it down, right? I think that what you've got to do is clearly link it to business outcomes. Clearly link it to what the CFO looks at as a metric.
Yes.
And drive it that way. And that was a constant challenge that I had. In terms of the sort of broad numbers, we would have, over a business cycle, a business plan, which was sort of 3 to 5 years, 3-year cycle, would probably be about £1 billion worth of investment going into technology. And, it's a couple of $100 million to run every year in terms of running costs and other sort of costs that were coming out of the technology. And, of course, that's across multiple carriers. It's not just...
Yeah.
Just British Airways, there's Iberia and Aer Lingus and Vueling is for people on the podcast, is probably the second largest low-cost carrier in Europe. Everyone may have heard of Ryanair or EasyJet. Vueling, based out of Barcelona, is the second largest and carries quite a significant number of passengers. The group that I work for, International Airlines Group, we carried 120 million customers every year. It's 530 odd aircraft in the group. There's some things. But, answer the direct question, it's about business outcomes. Whatever the executive teams are trying to drive as metrics should be what tech is enabling those metrics.
Yeah.
And then you spin it that way. And just like, I use a really good analogy in the airline, which is, airlines are very regulated, as everyone knows, and there's certain parts on an aircraft that you can do X number of cycles and you have to replace it. So a fan blade can do X number of cycles. You have to replace it. You look at the part and it's perfectly fine, right? There'd be nothing wrong with that part, but because it's done that many cycles, the rules and regulations say you must replace that. Technology should be thought of the same thing, and most businesses don't, right? And what CIOs and CTOs should do with talking to their CFOs and CEOs is talk about what is the life cycle of this tech right up front. We expect this tech will be okay for 3 years. You can run it for 5 years, but then you need to replace it. And then you need to just do a risk assessment. There's some critical tech to your business. Not everything's critical. So, maybe apologies to the HR people and sort of some of that, but, maybe your HR stuff is not critical infrastructure, whereas running your websites or running your selling or servicing, critical. Then you should have a clear cycle time for that to replace.
Yeah.
And a lot of businesses don't have that. It doesn't matter whether it's aviation or any business, which is, okay, so how long should this be hit and play for? And what's my sort of window of replacement? But what most CIOs go in is everything's broken, right? They walk in and go, everything's broken, right? There's so much technical debt, I've got to replace everything. Of course, the CFO goes, oh my God, and switches off instead of being really structured and saying, look, this stuff doesn't really care. We can keep it running. You might not be able to change it, right? And you've got to put some rules in place from a tech perspective and saying, I'm happy, we'll keep this running for the next 5 years if you want, but you're not going to change anything on it.
Yeah.
Right? And then you have your critical stuff and you say, right, it's reached its cycle time. We need to replace it. And just like an aircraft, if they didn't replace it, you'd lose your operator's certificate. You couldn't fly. And we need to have that conversation with the business, which is, if you do not replace this, you're not going to be able to operate.
Yeah.
And that's a different conversation to have. And it's a much more grown-up business conversation to have.
Yeah.
And it's putting it into, you need to have those analogies. They understand, I've got to replace those fan blades, otherwise I can't take off the aircraft. Well, yeah, you've also got to replace those servers, because if you don't replace those servers, you might not be able to take off either.
Yeah, I find those discussions are often easier to have in the sort of small to medium business, where you're looking at it from the perspective of, we use the cloud a lot, so there's not so much of these, elements that need replacing. Of, look, you can keep someone in a good, the right sort of technology on their desk and so on for, 1 or 2 cups of coffee a day for that person. And that's, it's pretty easy to sort of break it down and look at it in light of that. So that's an easy discussion. But when you're talking about, an airline that could blow through $1 billion or could blow through, a lot more over a period of time, then those things are obviously really, really important. And you've got to plan, well ahead, because it's not just a cup of coffee or two when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people and technology that needs really, really deep investment.
Yeah, I mean, at a peak period, I remember going on to a panel actually one time, and we had this panel, and there was a bunch of very senior tech people around, and and they were introducing, and one guy said, I'm responsible for $1 trillion going around the banks every day, and I'm like, oh, that's pretty impressive, that's there, and I'm sitting there thinking, hey, how do I explain? And it got to me, and I just turned around and said, well, I've got about 10 minutes. If my systems are down for 10 minutes, we have to call the police, right? And that's literally the situation. If you lose your operational systems at the terminal, you need to call the police in order to get crowd control to stop people coming in. There's a flow of hundreds of thousands of people coming into a terminal, to a busy international terminal. You have to think about that. And so, as I said before, a lot of tech people don't know how to translate business. And I think that tech has got a bad reputation, full stop. Doesn't matter whether it's aviation or banking or insurance or wherever you go, telecommunication. They need to step back, and tech need to talk about business outcomes, talk about what's really critical, and have a grown-up conversation. Could we run without this system? And see people twitch a little bit and go, well, yeah, maybe. Well, then that might not be as important. And okay, you can therefore not necessarily, you can run that longer, have a longer tail. This is really critical. If I lose my website, we lose revenue, we lose customers, et cetera, then, well, okay, let's invest in it.
Yeah. Now, another aspect, because you're not just looking at British Airways, the IAG group has multiple carriers. How has that sort of played out in terms of benefits and downsides from being able to look at the technology pieces? Because sometimes with scale you get some great benefits, right? But other times it potentially can slow things down. So you've got to have an approach to be able to keep the pace that's needed, right? So how's that? How have you approached that? How have you taken advantage of it?
You know, you can get the McKinseys and the Bains, and they'll come in and give you a very expensive portfolio of stuff to say this is how you should run it. I mean, and having the period, I've been through a set of cycles, and the cycles happen is technology can be treated as cost. Well, naturally, you would consolidate the technology across, you know, we've got Aer Lingus, British Airways, Iberia, Level, Vueling, IAG Loyalty, IAG Cargo, IAG GBS, which is a sort of business services unit. And, you know, and you could quite easily go along and say, oh, well, there's a big number, we can save money and bring it together. You know, as I was leaving the business, we'd moved into a situation where we were actually pushing the decision making and responsibilities out to the edge. And a really good reason being is faster, they're agile, they're working with the business outcomes, so driving business outcomes, and then look at sort of taking the opportunities to consolidate on like joint buying. So, you know, you could do it through a procurement and sort of, you know, you don't buy Microsoft Office or anything like that. You can leverage your scale as a group and have Office, but let the individual business units be autonomous in terms of their decision making. And I think that's much better. My view is technology needs to get closer to the business and become part of the business at the edge. Very much like edge computing. You move it out, you know, it was, you know, you've got these big hyperscalers with, you know, AWS and Azure and everything. What you're seeing in the VC world is this growth of the edge computing. Now, it doesn't mean that you get rid of that big hyperscaler in the middle. It means you collaborate in a much more network effect. So think of it in terms of big central things moving to a network effect, if that explains well. So smaller, independent, faster, agile, be able to make quicker decisions, have more autonomy about what's broken, what needs fixing, and doing that. So, you know, I've seen it go one way or the other, and I think the distributed side is a much more business-oriented example. So it's, you know, closer to the business and driving business outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of some of the more recent innovations and so on, you know, when we were chatting over coffee this morning, it was certainly interesting, hearing some of those things that you've been been involved in, and of course, you know, COVID has brought a lot of change with it, and part of that is we're in a position in many parts of the world where finding staff to do certain roles is a big challenge. So there, you know, and I guess that, you know, at times when I've sort of, you know, been speaking from a futurist perspective, be it, you know, TV or public speaking and so on, you know, there's all these questions, oh, what about the jobs and so on? But actually we seem to be in this position now where actually if we can bring sort of robotics and automation to play, actually the people aren't necessarily there, you know, wanting or able to do, you know, some of these roles. So there's I think it's becoming maybe a little bit more acceptable to look at these things, and of course people want cheap airfares, and airfares and costs are going up. So, you know, how does the thing sort of you know, fit together at the moment in terms of the areas where the innovation is happening and the change is happening?
Look, I mean, innovation's just constant, right? It's a constant, and you know, roles are being replaced for many, many years. You know, right back, you know, decades ago, roles were being replaced, and of course, what's happened is there's new roles, and I think even in New Zealand and the UK, certainly, there's more jobs than there are people to find. You know, one of the things that COVID happened is obviously, you know, get your operational costs down very, very fast, because literally we went from 110 million customers to zero overnight. So that's a good way to burn some cash if you've got all of those costs. So obviously all the airlines globally got rid of people, right?
It's mind-blowing that so many airlines still exist.
Well,
you know,
that's a whole different story, but maybe should they exist versus do they do exist? I mean, look, let's face it, airlines are what I would call critical infrastructure to a country.
Yeah.
It's like energy security. So IATA published a stat, which is public, that about 70% of airlines, global airlines, had less than 6 months worth of cash runway. Right now, if I was looking at a startup and there was 6 months worth of cash runway, I'd start to raise the sort of hairs on the back of my neck and going, how do we get the, good 1 to 2 year runway? But most 70% of global carriers, and these are big, very big carriers, had less than 6 months worth of cash. How many went bust during COVID? Very, very few. I mean, there was a couple, but the reason being, I think, is they are attached to the nation, and IAG's done a fairly good job of. I mean, most people wouldn't know IAG, what it stood for. I think it's an Australian insurance company or something like that, but it's International Airlines Group. What it did was worked on it kept the brand. So Aer Lingus is very recognised in Ireland, obviously.
Yeah.
And it hasn't become a British Airways where, there might be sort of, I'm loyal to Aer Lingus, not British Airways, because I'm Irish and not British, or Iberia, which is Spanish. So IAG sort of done that sort of much more of a sort of, a model of growth and leveraging it across the patch.
Yep.
But airlines scaled down massively, and then, of course, it had to scale up. And the roles, we couldn't get people back in, so there was a natural place to start to put some autonomy and automation into the business and saying, that's where it is. And actually, if you ask most people that are doing manual functional roles, they don't want to do them, right? And if you work with them, they've got great ideas. And we've got pretty good use cases where working with the team, not working with the leadership, because, there are 2 levels, 3 levels extracted from what's happening on the ground on a daily basis, but working with the guys on the ground or the teams on the ground and actually coming up with some design thinking process, 2-day workshop and saying, could we do this better? You want to see the ideas that come out of these people, and then using tech to be an enabler of those ideas, transformational. We took a 3-man pushback team. So, you got an aircraft.
Yep.
So an aircraft needs to be pushed off stand, right? And it's usually they have a tractor, and there's usually 3 people, 1 walking the wing, 2 driving the tractor, or 1, supporting the tractor and a driver of the tractor connecting the aircraft to this tractor, and it pushes or reverses the aircraft back out onto the taxiway so that they can start. Now, we took that sort of 3-man team down to a 1-man to an autonomous robot. It's called a MotorTOC. You could look it up on YouTube or anything like this. And what the MotorTOC does is essentially a little robot that the operator can walk on the wing. So you've still got an operator. He could walk on the wing and push an aircraft back autonomously, and then he can disconnect, and the unit can go back. And that's a significant good for the company because it saved costs. Great for the operators because they loved actually operating these things, so they could, one of the challenges was, wing walking, who's going to drive? Because I wanted to drive, who's going to do this? So now you've got these individuals that are controlling these MotorTOCs and doing those. So there's plenty of roles. They're just evolving into different skill sets. So I don't think
there can be quite a flow on from each of those things, right?
absolutely.
You talk about it from that resourcing perspective. But one of the flights is on the last few months. I think you have a delay that's caused by, in fact, that's probably been more than one flight in the last few months that's been impacted by those resourcing type things. Folks are busy elsewhere, or someone's, running around, needs to do X, Y, Z.
And aviation's a perfect place to put autonomy because it's a structured place. There's real strict rules and regulations.
Yeah.
Put an autonomous car on the road, and it's quite difficult technology to solve, right? Whereas an airport, it's much more like a milk run, right? There's certain things, certain speeds, certain processes must be followed legally, and so on. So actually doing automation airside, as we call it, that boundary between the sort of where passengers see and then airside is the below the wing where it operates, is autonomy is great to have down there because it's a perfect place to have it. And actually it's a safer, so a lot of the time we talk about safety for doing autonomous because it's actually much safer. It's consistent, safer, and those sorts of things. There's loads of areas you could automate. I very much see the I don't usually predict. Futurists should never predict because they're always going to be wrong. But what we can do is prepare for what the future could look like. And I believe the future will be what we would call dark below the wing, i.e. there'll be very few humans operating below the wing, where today there's quite a lot of operating people below the wing. And it will be more efficient. I'm sure a number of people on this podcast have come in on an aircraft and sat there for 10 minutes waiting for someone to put a jet bridge onto the door so that after your long haul flight, all you want to do is get up and get out of that thing. Right? And, that could be autonomous. The guidance systems that you have to come onto the aircraft, automatic. The jet bridge, automatic, docks onto the aircraft. It's all very possible. Machine vision, AI, all of those technologies can make that happen. In fact, we've got in Heathrow, there's an autonomous jet bridge that we're in operation trialling out just as we were going into COVID, starting to look at that. And safety, and actually most humans actually like it. They're now sitting there with an iPad. They've got 3-4 cameras controlling multiple stands, and they're feeling much more valued as an individual because they've got a bigger role and better roles.
Yeah, and Qantas in the last few days, I think there's a bit of bad press over luggage getting kicked around by baggage handlers. So autonomous movement of luggage. I mean, things are going to happen, and the bots don't always get it perfect every time. Either, right?
Yeah,
so
no.
you gotta have a bit of grace in there for you don't know what's going on in people's worlds, but that becomes another area that over time will help make things more efficient,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, I mean, if you walked into an Amazon warehouse, big distribution center in Amazon, and I'm sorry, I'm using a European sort of example in terms of big warehouses. What Amazon do, they've got 10-minute delivery now. They have to have slick processes, right, in London and stuff like this. So you won't see that many humans. It's autonomous, it's robots. You go into a car manufacturer, Porsche or VW Group or a Tesla, whatever, you pick one, there's a lot more robots. Airports, there's a lot more humans and manual things happening. I think that transition will change, and my colleagues over in Qantas, I feel their pain. Most airlines have experienced some sort of baggage challenge, and it's a complex set of processes. It's a complex business. If you take something like T5 at Heathrow, well, it is one of the busiest international airports on its own right.
Just that terminal
terminal
5.
globally,
Yeah.
right? You see this massive big terminal up front, and everyone, that's what people recognise. The customers and people who have been to Heathrow would have seen that terminal. What they don't realise is there's 4 more of those levels below that big front house, and that's all full of baggage and baggage systems and baggage storage and security and X-ray and all of these sorts of things. So, it's like 4 or 5 levels deep, and I think it actually even goes a bit deeper than that because then you've got your trains and other bits and pieces coming in. So it's complex. I feel Qantas's pain. I have been there. I have seen some baggage failures ourselves, but it's an area where you'll definitely, from a consumer point of view, they'll see improvements coming. And airlines sort of went through this very innovative phase decades ago, and then they went into that sort of cost phase, and things got worse. And I think most people would say that things got sort of worse. And then what you're seeing now is with sort of some of the other newer carriers come along, things have started to get better. Front of house, a good example of something we'll see is no boarding pass, no passport required, right? I mean, the paper documents, and if you're traveling and if you travel regularly, you got hand luggage, bottled water, and then, hang on a minute, I've got to where's my passport? Where's my phone or this boarding pass? There's absolutely no need for that stuff. So in a few locations that we've done out in the US now, there's no passport required and there's no boarding pass required. You just walk up, the gate opens, you walk onto the aircraft. And the amount of frequent travellers I've seen that walk through that and then turn around and go, oh my God, what happened? They're looking like they're holding on to something in their hand and going, and you see them physically turn around and like,
need it.
am I okay to carry on, sort of thing?
Yeah.
Because the process is seamless. Security. So we've seen these new, at the moment, take shoes off, take everything off, unload, pack, unload. Well, if anyone's seen some of the movies, the future movies, there's a famous Arnold Schwarzenegger movie in terms of, where he just walks through a set of cameras and stuff like this, and it detects that they're carrying something they shouldn't be carrying. And that technology is now there, and it's coming, and you'll see it more and more. There's a few airports now that you don't need to take your liquids out, you don't need to take your shoes off, and you can just process. So it's all about that processing going through and making it touchless. And COVID's been a great, I've always said that CDIO or a chief digital officer or a chief technology officer, COVID's been the chief digital officer for most businesses, right? It's forced businesses to think digital transformation.
Yes, yeah.
And, COVID was, who wants to hold a passport that might be infected sort of thing? So it had to go touchless. So, the fact is that document should recognize you as an individual, should walk through the process and seamless. We had this, concept of setting a business objective of not having to break your stride walking through the airport. So, to just walk through the airport. We're not there yet, but we're getting very close. I mean, one of the big challenges we've got at the moment is bags. Obviously, Qantas is probably experiencing this. So another area of tech innovation that we're doing has been working with a startup where get rid of the bag tag. You've got good machine vision, you've got AI, you've got quantum aspects. So you can do what we call quantum entanglement, where you can actually create a digital tag onto a physical thing, and then use cameras, and then your local iPhone or Android device can identify a bag and say, yeah, that's Glenn's bag.
Yeah.
So I can see in the future even the bag tag disappearing. That would mean that you just come along to a conveyor belt, drop a bag onto the conveyor belt, don't need to put a bag tag onto it, anything like that. So those seamless, frictionless touch points will be what you'll see at the top, and below you'll see much more autonomous. And you'll probably start to see it coming into the aircraft in terms of, probably know that military run a lot of drones already. You would have seen that. Yeah, it's not that far away before we start to see that maybe it's not two pilots in the aircraft. There's one pilot in the aircraft and a pilot on the ground.
Sure. And electric shocks for those of us who they sit down in the wrong seat.
Yep.
I did that in the last few months. I don't know what I was thinking, or I wasn't paying attention, and I was one row too far back or too far forward.
Travel's stressful, right?
Yeah.
I mean, travel's stressful, and one of the things we have done studies on this, and that actually there's not many situations where you're not directly in control of what you have to do, right? And travel is one of those situations where you're told what to do. Put your seatbelt on, sit there, do this, right? And of course, what happens is then there's the stress comes into that, and then people make mistakes, and so that's quite natural. But I think that nowadays most of the equipment's going to be on the seat. You're going to be much more thinking about it being personalised and stuff like this. You're still going to get mistakes, right? And people are going to do things that they shouldn't do, but it will change. Your seat will be much more telling. Trying to find the small numbers. I mean, most people don't think about the simple things like is the number too small for a lot of people to read, right? Are those seat numbers too small? Or on the boarding pass, and they're like, arms starting to stretch out or come a bit further out to try and read where they're sitting. So these are the sorts of things you've got to think about from a business process perspective, and how do you eliminate that? How do you make it really simple for people?
Yeah, it's nice on the Air New Zealand, the international flights, so it's not just Air New Zealand, but where your name's on the names up there.
And you know that if it's not your name.
You're like,
and that's exactly, look, Air New Zealand, hats off. I mean, great company. Maybe I'm a bit biased because I'm a Kiwi, but they're great size to innovate with, and have done a lot of great innovations. I just encourage them to be a little bit more aggressive on that innovation trance. I think that Air New Zealand could be a great, a great leader in the industry for doing some transformation. And frankly, actually, New Zealand could be a great, if COVID is the CDO in terms of that chief digital officer, then New Zealand's got the best opportunity globally, and that's I've been all around the world, in the Valley, in China, in Israel, where all the tech spots are. New Zealand could be one of those. It could be competing at that level, genuinely, and really driving things. New Zealanders by nature are more innovative. It's the number 8 wire and hammer job, and they make things happen and do things. So I see the opportunity, and Air New Zealand's a great brand that's shown that. I think, even some of the work that Qantas and Singapore and other carriers have done, they've shown sort of some great entrepreneurial sort of side of things. New Zealand as a country could be that entrepreneurial thing. And I'd love to see New Zealand be like that. It's the right size. It's easy to test things. Maybe the government needs a little push in terms of Christopher Luxon, is in the opposition at the moment in terms of he's coming from that aviation sector, so he's seen real world examples. But I'd love to see New Zealand think more innovatively. It's ideal.
This last period of time, we've often seen some splits in thinking around certain things, and you talked about walking through a terminal and everything kind of just happening. There's always an aspect when we talk about these things like facial recognition and biometrics, which is just like, boy, that's amazing. And then the other perspective of how do we balance that need, sort of privacy and cybersecurity type risks and so on as to how you do that stuff. And I guess what I wonder is, can you kind of cater to a mix of audiences by giving people that option of, look, you can be absolutely all in 100% on the technology, but if you're off to with a perspective of, I don't want this level, that you can still carry your phone or your physical passport or whatever? Or do you think we're going to just have to go down one track, and it's kind of like it's this way or you walk to your destination? What do you think?
Yeah, let's unpack that first, right? And unpack that a little bit, because I think it's really important. Firstly, I'll talk about the tech side of things. So the tech side of things, we're hitting what I would call the third wave of the internet. So the first wave was very much the sort of read-only side of things. We may have had an email address or something along those lines. The second wave was this social and e-commerce wave, which was, Web 2. You could buy stuff off the internet, you could interact, you could put your content up onto there, but it was sort of read-write and sort of read-only. First wave, read-write. Second wave, we're coming on to the third wave, which I would call, and some people call it Web 3, as a terminology. I've struggled. I've met many CIOs. I've met many business leaders. I've met many VCs and entrepreneurs and everything, and I've yet to have a consistent what is Web 3. I'll give my definition of it. This third wave, I think, is read, write, own, whereas today platforms own your data. Regardless of whether you think that I'm not going to give my data to these stupid companies that might abuse the data, which, and there's many examples of that happening. If you're flying, you're giving your data regardless of whether you like it or not. You're not getting on the aircraft. If you're going to fly to the States,
umpteen times as you walk through an airport.
Yeah, if you're flying to the States, you're going to that data goes to the States 5 times. Before you even fly, right?
The fingerprint readers at the other end that have been there for years.
Yeah, they're taking your biometrics. So it's a little hard to. I've taken the concept of actually the third wave is very good for the aviation industry, in which is we can actually move, instead of sending that data all around those supply parties, is send signals to say that this data is good. So you don't need to know that Glenn Morgan, is from New Zealand, as the New Zealand government recognises him, blah, blah, blah. This is his date of birth, this is where he was born, this is all that passport information is quite, personal, and even I as a tech don't want necessarily all of that data to go around. But there's no reason that you can't have this situation where, it's that data is trusted, and just saying, actually, I'm not going to send the data, I'll just send a signal to say the data is good, right? And then, of course, you need the other. So this third wave, there is opportunities, without going into the acronyms or into all the tech side of things, which is the tech allows the data to stay with the individual. It doesn't go anywhere else. It's not going to be stored on someone else's. Now, I'll caveat that with governments will store data, right? That's, but everybody else in the value stream, from airlines through to airports, through to the security people, through to all the other people that would potentially today have access to that data, they don't need to see that. So that data stays with the individual, and what you then end up with is a signal saying that data's okay. And therefore, and so the example I said about the boarding with no passport or boarding pass, when you come into the US, your biometrics are taken. So I don't even have to register the biometrics. So what we would do is we do a lookup to the US government. They want exit checks. They need to know that you've come into the country and you exit the country. So they're going to use it. So what we do is we just plug an API, which is a technical term for having an interface, one computer talk to another computer. So these interfaces, what we send it and say, we're expecting Paul Spain on this aircraft. US government, I'm expecting Paul Spain to leave the US because he's not a US citizen. He come here for a certain visit or whatever. And that check. So we've eliminated multiple checks because they're going to do that check anyway. We've built it in, and then we're saying, well, okay, we know that's Paul Spain. He can get onto the aircraft. So the gates are now got there. And all you're getting now, instead of having all of that passport information, all of that data, including your flight number, who you're traveling with, it might be, people might be sensitive about who they're traveling with or not traveling with. All of that sort of sensitive data now doesn't necessarily have to go to all of that value stream. It can stay with the individual, and a signal just says, I don't even need to know it's Paul Spain. I just need to know that it's good.
Yeah.
And the gate will open. And so that's what we're doing. So it's very technical. Hopefully I've articulated in a way that people can understand, but essentially your data stays with you.
Yeah,
Whereas the
good.
manual process today, and the people that are saying, I don't want to go anywhere near the tech, is then you hand over your passport to somebody and they stick it all in. When they check it, they have it, ability to get a camera nowadays, and they can scan it very quickly and suck all the information from it. So I think actually the newer way is going to be more safe and secure for the individual. From a privacy point of view, it's better process, it's slicker process for the individual. But you always have that manual capability, Anyway, it's not going to go away, but you will see the frequent travellers just adopt it like that, because who wouldn't want to just walk through an airport?
Yeah. Obviously, there's government aspects there which kind of fall outside, and there's all sorts of discussions to be had on that front as to how we sort of move forward with governments who aren't always that good with data.
Governments
how
love
we,
FOMO, though,
how
right?
we, how we join these dots up.
I'll let you into a little secret, right? The fear of missing out is the government's. If you want a government to do something, and I'll hopefully it's not to too many people, right? I'd let you. We used to working with the US. We would tell the UK government, look, we're doing this with the US, and they'd go, well, what are you doing with the US? what we need to be doing this, surely, don't we?
Yeah.
And then so you can use that fear of missing out. So some governments are actually very innovative, and New Zealand's in that space. New Zealand's quite lead with Australia and Canada, I think, in terms of leading on the digitisation of the passport, i.e. having a standard way of, so there's another body, part of the United Nations, the ICAO standards, which is basically say this is what a passport looks like and this is what the things you need on a passport. New Zealand and Australia are leading some of the digitisation of that, so that now you'll have a recognised, if you've seen your wallets that you have on your phones, that it's not far away from having your passport in that wallet.
Yeah.
And therefore that data just stays with that phone. It doesn't go around all of the rest of that value stream. I think that's really actually where we need to be.
Yeah.
Much more secure. You're not going to... Hackers love honeypots, right? So anyone that's storing massive amounts of data, right, is an attack vector. Yeah. It's a honeypot for the hackers to go after. If I can get 100 million customers' passports, that's what I'm going to go after. So from a CTO perspective, I want one bit of data in hundreds or millions of places, right? And therefore, it's not attractive. Hack Glenn Morgan, whoop-de-doo, I'll share it with you. It's not that interesting, right? But, so stop those honeypots. I think that is that third wave of the internet, this Web3, people might hear of it, is going to help. And Web3 is not just some of the acronyms that are thrown around. I think there's this decentralization coming, which is sort of tech is, instead of big central platforms, is moving to the edge. So you'll have computers at the edge doing the processing. It's AI. You've seen probably a lot in the press, and you've talked about on your podcast this. We're going through a renaissance of AI. Chat GPT released this week and everything like that. And AI, machine vision, edge computing. You bring all of those together with this blockchain. I say that with a sort of, people look and raise an eyebrow. FTX is a company that just lost billions because of this technology. But this decentralization technology gives the advantages to actually bring this Web3 together, make us safer, more secure, read, write, own. And when I say own, the content that's your content you own, not an Amazon or a Google or a Facebook or a Meta or et cetera, instead of moving all your data to the platforms, you'll keep your data. But it does bring some new business models that you could do, because you might want to sell your data. So you might say, well, actually, I'm quite happy for X company, Y company to have that data.
Have access to certain data that
you can say, here's access to my data, and you can say, I want them to have access for a year or a month or a day or everything. So we will see that technology come. It should be invisible. I mean, we shouldn't be talking about tech. We should be talking about the business process.
Yeah.
How does it enable me? I expect that a Air New Zealand or a British Airways or a American Qantas handle my data securely, safely, in a good way. Let them, do that and trust from that side.
Now and I know there's a lot more we can talk about, but to wrap up, I do think it'll be good just to talk about the opportunity for New Zealand.
Yep.
We have had many innovative, things come out of New Zealand. We want to drive that up. We want more of that to happen for our economy to be taking advantage of the innovation and the creativity. We often hear the talk around sort of weightless exports and exporting our IP, that it shouldn't just be beef and lamb that we're selling to the world and dairy and so on. What do you see as the sort of exciting things that are happening here? I know you've been meeting with a number of startups and companies, while you're here or will be. What are the things that sort of, spin your wheels and give you a bit of excitement about our potential going forward?
I mean, obviously, my experience is based out in Europe, and I'm expat in that side of things. And I look over to New Zealand, and I sort of sometimes I sort of want to bang my fist on the table and think frustration about why isn't New Zealand much more innovative than what it can do? It's perfectly positioned. It's now got the connectivity. It's got the smarts. There's a lot of very, very smart people in New Zealand. You take some of the best AI that Google's bought, a company called DeepMind. One of the co-founders is a Kiwi. Went to Rotorua University. There's lots of smarts, Rocket Labs, you name them. There's some innovative companies all around the place. I'm seeing a couple of sustainability, the green agenda is massive. It's massive for every business. It's not just airlines, frankly, but airlines have a significant challenge. A third of their cost is made up of this sort of carbon fuel side of things. So, innovation around sustainability. New Zealand's perfectly positioned to be a sustainability leader, right? But, there's the likes of this company in New Zealand called Carbon Click, and, they're doing some great things about genuinely offsetting your carbon emissions and sort of things like that. Other really innovative companies based out in the US are using New Zealand as the test bed around autonomous flight. So Merlin Labs is another good example in working from the US, but also based here in New Zealand. And there's Xero accounting. Go to a simple accounting. So New Zealand has the opportunity to be at the forefront, and New Zealand's larger in terms of size, is certainly country size, but Israel's done this, right? And Israel's turned its GDP into that talent. A lot of startups spin out of Israel and then end up in Silicon Valley or out of there. New Zealand has got that talent, has got the ecosystem. What's missing? And I think there's a few things missing. And I'm sure that if you spoke to a few of the expats that are based out of San Francisco, it'll be money, investment, government support, right? Is the government actually encouraging it? Sustainability is going to be probably $1 trillion industry, not $1 billion, trillions. And it shouldn't be even a debate in Parliament, be it whichever party you support. We should be injecting into this space because we could be leaders in this space and it could be the new GDP of the country. There's a lot of innovation happening in farming. How can you transfer some of that innovation into banking, insurance, aviation?
Sure.
Pick your sector.
Yeah.
So, frustration, a plea out to the politicians that may be listening, is you've got the talent in the country. You've got the core infrastructure. The tech has now, it was a bit of we were having this conversation this morning. I was asking about the connectivity to the globe and in terms of the talent and the compute that's available. That's all sort of pretty much fixed and there now. So we've got the ingredients. We need to build the cake.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So New Zealand could be, and I'd love to see a lot more of driving these startups, getting, really encouraging people to build a startup. We've met some sort of neat people entering the industry and they're asking, should I go to a corporate? Should I go to a startup? Go to a startup, create your own business, create the next Xero, create the next Google. There's no reason New Zealand couldn't be doing that. We're connected. The world's small now. It's interconnected. There's a lot of great things to happen. So, yeah, I have a big plug. I have passion to say that New Zealand should be leading. It's not at the moment, but it's got an opportunity to do.
Yeah, and look, I certainly hope what we'll see is government move up and those wheels turn a lot faster, because it's all very well having innovation and so on happening at pace. We've seen it in the aerospace sector actually here, where things have moved very quickly, but we struggle or we hold back, a lot of these opportunities if the legislative support and the government funding support and those mechanisms don't line up right. And it's all very well if those things get fixed up 5 years down the track, but that's too late, because there becomes a whole lot of missed opportunities.
And without the knowledge and the background of it, I bet a lot of the conversations about tech, not about GDP in terms of what's growth for the country. I think you'd have a much, much more engaging conversation with the Prime Minister or the opposition or whoever about talking about, what does New Zealand's GDP look like in 4 years, 5 years' time? And what are the enablers of that GDP and what should it be? I think that would be a much more engaging conversation to have. And I think that that's the conversation that needs to have, not, hey, we could be the AI specialists of the world, right? That's not going to work. However, we've got that talent. We know we've got that talent. Problem is we're exporting it, right? And others are seeing that opportunity. Why can't we? We've got best beaches in the world. We've got the best, working from home is a thing. It didn't have to be. Now you can work anywhere. We talk about these digital nomads. It's a trend, a massive big trend. So you used to have leisure and business travellers. You have bleisure travellers now. Sorry for the acronym, but bleisure, a mix of business and leisure. So people are not just going there. Airbnb.
Bring them to New Zealand,
yeah,
right?
Airbnb and making a meal out of it and saying, right, go and live on the beach down in Ohope, where I'm from, down in Ohope, right on the beach. The surf point's just there. Do your work with the high-speed Wi-Fi, jump on the surfboard and go for a surf.
There you go.
Jump on your motorbike and go up the mountains and blast around on the mountains. Do whatever your passion is. New Zealand's got that in buckets. It's headspace, it's tech, it's all of that come together. And I think conversation with governments would be, how do we increase GDP? How do we make New Zealand sustainable? How do we lead the globe with, the big ticket items that make things different? The green agenda. I can't think of any country better to lead the green agenda.
Excellent. Well, that's been awesome. Thank you for the privilege of taking the time out to join us on the New Zealand Tech
Excellent.
Podcast. Thank you, Glenn Morgan. And of course, thank you to our show partners for their support of not only the New Zealand Tech Podcast, but the broader tech and innovation ecosystems here in New Zealand. So thank you to Vodafone, 2 Degrees, Spark, HP, and Gorilla Technology. All right, thanks, folks. We'll catch you on the next episode. See ya.
Cheers.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.